Welcome, Dave, and thank you for joining us on our podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jack. Great to see you again.
Great to see you. Dave, first of all, as an intro, just tell us who you are and what you do.
So, my name is David Stevens. I am currently a freelance design principal at Shell, and I've previously been a design director, head of design teams. I've been a researcher over the years, but ultimately, my role is to help businesses become more human-centered in the way that they approach their work.
And Dave, you mentioned design there. I think a few of our listeners may not even know what design means or what research means. Can you just explain a little bit about what they are?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you first hear design, you're probably thinking making things look pretty, and that's not quite. There's a bit of that, but it's not really what we talk about when we talk about design. It's more of an abbreviated term for human-centered design or user-centered design, which came out of, I think it's the 1986. It was first coined by a guy called Don Norman, who's written lots of books, including like the design of everyday things, emotional design, but he was widely credited along with a guy called Jakob Nielsen. So they had the Norman Nielsen group, or Nielsen Norman, I can't remember which way around it is now, for talking about the benefits of designing things for people with them in mind, rather than simply kind of designing technology or solutions that work from a business perspective, or we think there's an easy way to design things, but or to create them, or it's a simple solution, but a lot of the time people don't understand what the problem is. So with human-centered design, it's much more about understanding the real problem, really empathizing with people's needs, doing lots of what we call divergent thinking, so ideating, coming up with lots of different divergent solutions to look past the obvious ones, and then doing important things like prototyping and testing, so that you de-risk what you're delivering out into the world. So if you think about any of the products that are out there in the world right now, the ones in your pocket, the new ski goggles that have come out from Apple, or anything that is both desirable and functional, has gone through a design process. Some people might be more comfortable with engineering. It's a similar process there. So it's kind of creating something new out of something that actually fulfills a problem, and might well include some extra layers of technology that make things beautiful and easy to use along the way. So that's a long-winded version of it.
No, it's a great explanation. Obviously, I've worked with you before, Dave, so I've got a bit of an understanding of design. But it's great for our listeners just to know a little bit more about it. And you're now working currently at Shell.
Yeah.
What sort of things is sort of like are you does the design principles come into? Is it looking at different products and services and how you help that end user?
Yeah, so that I'm part of a very large team within the software engineering kind of part of Shell. But our team is called Experience Design. And the purpose of our team really is to effectively create or design people's experience with energy. So it's not just about it's not just about the consumer facing stuff, what we would call kind of downstream. So that would include things like EV or electric vehicle charging points, or even like the Shell Go app and things like that, like rewards and things like that. That's kind of the most consumer facing stuff that we look at. A lot of it is to do with is how the business works as well. We've got lots of internal users who need to keep things like energy sites safe. So there's a lot of focus on safety and the systems that support that. There's also some really interesting stuff with drones. And so being able to use drones to fly around a deep sea drill site and spot safety issues potentially. But there's also a huge focus on sustainability as well. So really trying to make sure that the business operates in a sustainable way, and we try and get ever closer to a net zero position, which is some way off, admittedly, but yeah, we'll get there at some point. But my role within Shell is actually not too dissimilar to what we worked on before, Jack, when we were at HSBC, and it's to build a design academy. And what that means essentially is to educate the business in what human-centered design looks like and feels like, but it's also to level up the skills of the design team of about kind of like 150 people at the moment. And it's not that they're extremely talented folks, right? But we've got to constantly look to the future of what design skills or what creativity skills and execution skills we need in the business, so that we're constantly kind of outperforming our competitors. It's also really helpful because when you think about Shell or any other big energy company, people might not naturally think, like, designers are quite an empathetic bunch and quite kind of principled a lot of the time. And so thinking about an energy giant or even a bank or something like that, they might not be the first port of call for the most talented designers out there. So actually kind of having a skills framework that means, we're leveling up those skills, it becomes really attractive to people who are kind of budding designers. And we've got kind of like quite a big pool of not quite entry level, but certainly more junior folks on the spectrum at the moment, as well as some very senior experienced people. So we've got a big team out in India and the Netherlands, the States, and obviously the UK as well. So it's a distributed workforce, but we're working on kind of, making sure we've got those core skills really nailed and making it an attractive place to work.
And all with the customer in mind, right? And trying to design those products and services to have the customer at the heart of everything you design. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely has to be that. So it's you're 100% right that the customer has to be at the forefront of what we're doing and at the heart of key decisions. And I think one of the big things that we've got to get to is more mature organizations out there in terms of a design or a customer perspective have what you would call kind of customer focused outcomes. So they're really strongly guiding the business and the product strategy of those organizations. And something that we're really trying to do at the moment is make sure that those outcomes or those measures are embedded into the way that at least software is delivered across the business as well. Because at the moment we've got to make sure that it's obviously customer focused, but it's got to be a viable proposition and it's got to be feasible to deliver something as well. So it's kind of in that mix of in that mix of the trifecta: desirable, viable, and feasible.
Absolutely, I can remember. Well. So Dave, let's roll back a little bit. Where did your journey start? So did you go to university?
I did, but I'd say my journey with design started before that, actually. So when I was at school, so I had a really great design and technology teacher called Mr. Shepherd, and he was an absolute taskmaster, but he got me to appreciate the value of just creativity, I think, and really working with my hands a lot more. So I remember my GCSE and A-level projects there. Actually, it's more my A-level. I had a real passion for Apple products before kind of the iPhone was a thing, obviously. And I actually designed I think it was the first time that it was done. It obviously wasn't, but a watch for Apple. I called it iTime. And there was another thing that I designed, like a light or a lamp or something, and got to actually show off the prototype at an Audi showroom, I think, as part of like a young designers kind of showcase. But I really got a passion there for the creativity element of it. But what I hadn't honed yet was an understanding of the problems, like really finding the right problem to solve for. That really came at university. So after my A-levels, I went to art college, which was a way of hanging out with my mates for a year and spending a lot more time in the pub and, making music and things like that. But I did get a really good appreciation of, we did a foundation kind of degree in art and design. And I got appreciation of lots of other things like film and media, photography, including a bit of textiles and fashion and things like that. And it allowed me to explore other parts of design before I then kind of really focused on my degree, which was in product design engineering. So it started off, it was an interesting one because I was like, I want to make something that works. So I went to University of Sussex. They had a really good kind of aeronautics and engineering team there, but the design course was actually quite new and immature. It had only been going for like 2 or 3 years. So we were kind of tacked on to lots of different other courses, like, you know, ended up doing like advanced maths courses and stuff, which I'm not good at. Okay, I'm not good at that at all. I've really struggled. We got tacked on to like some CAD modeling kind of classes with IT grads and or undergrads, and if there was one class I was really looking forward to because it was called the Principles of Design, and I was like, oh, we're going to learn everything about like, you know, DataRams and all these like famous design schools, but it wasn't that at all. It was how to design an internal combustion engine for a car. And pretty much the only thing I remember from that class was the lecturer. He had this like grand plan to show the difference between petrol and diesel, and he smothered one hand in petrol and smothered one hand in diesel, and lit the hand which he thought was diesel, and it shouldn't light because it needs to be compressed, but he got them mixed up and he set his hand on fire.
Oh no.
But anyway, after a couple of years, a few of us were like, this isn't really what we signed up for. We managed to lobby for and got like some new lecturers in from the Royal College of Art, and that got someone in called Rob Phillips, who was absolutely fantastic. Like, he really helped me understand like how quickly you need to prototype something, the real importance of finding the right problem to solve for, the importance of actually speaking to people to understand what their issues are, and what we'd call kind of ethnography or observational research. So I decided to spend lots of time with older people because my nan at the time was she had arthritis and struggled with lots of different things around the house, like particularly turning dials and keys and things like that. So I combined kind of, you know, it's a good excuse to go and see my nan and get some nice biscuits and tea, take some photos of her struggling with stuff and some of her friends, and then actually design something that could potentially help. So,
Wow.
So after lots and lots of prototypes, like my tutor was like, okay, you've done one prototype, like, where's the next one? I was like, I'll do another one next week probably. And he's like, no, do it now so that you can test it tomorrow. Come back and tell me what you've learned. So it involved lots of that, like building something rough and ready out of cardboard or you know, a different type of foam or something like that, like you used to get this foam that you kind of carve out shapes from, and basically see what happened with it. In the end, I worked with a smart material which was just starting out at the time, called Sugru. You might see it in B&Q now, but it's like a moldable plastic, so it feels like Play-Doh to start off with, but then it kind of dries into a plastic or a rubber. So it's really good for fixing stuff, but it allowed me to customize these grips for older people on, and make, you know, they didn't need to buy anything new, and they had this like nice kind of a nice product but it was like all about inclusive design, making sure that it didn't feel like something you might see in occupational health or something like that. It didn't look like it was someone who had a disability. It just looked like something, you know, a nice little gadget or desirable item around the house. After that, though, I graduated straight into the recession. In 2008. So that was a nice fun time. And the only job that I got offered as a designer was to design bins for kids' playgrounds in the shape of hippos and other animals in Blackpool for £9,000 a year, something like that. So I thought, I'm going to stay at home for a bit longer and ride this out. And I actually went into by that point I had to do lots of presentation skills and things like that. So I'd mastered a fair bit of like graphics and layout design. And so I went to work for a local magazine publisher in the building trade. So we had, you know, really exciting titles like Global Cement magazine, Global Gypsum, and one of them had an insert which was Global Slag, which came out once every quarter, being the waste material that comes off cement production.
Oh, okay.
And so the recession had kind of did me a favour because we were all forced down to 4-day working weeks. Had to take a 20% cut in pay, and using that extra day, I decided to volunteer, or sort of half volunteer, half intern at some local design agencies, to try and get an understanding of, you know, how do I get into this industry. After about a year of that, I've got my first job as a usability researcher. So that involves looking at basically sitting with the users of websites and understanding where they find things easy and difficult, and then designing better ways of doing it, or working with a design team to actually kind of do that. So that's my first proper research job, and really focused on things like in the finance industry, lots of websites for things like Barclays, and did loads of projects for like Aviva and things like that. Lots of insurance kind of forms. What's the best way of getting people a quote, and that kind of stuff.
So it's all about user experience.
Yeah, all about user experience. Yeah, and really making sure that things are not only simple to use, but they actually kind of had a useful business benefit as well. So like, if you make things easier to use, people are more likely to buy the thing that you're trying to sell them, or they're more likely to complete a form without errors, which is going to take away some cost later on. So I did that for a few years, and then kind of went into something called service design, which was it's effectively, if you think about mapping a customer journey, like what good looks like, service design is the design of the business in the back end to make sure that those customer experiences are actually possible. So that involves, working with lots of technology teams or data, risk, all the different parts of a business that facilitate, customer experiences actually coming to life. All the kind of the nuts and bolts behind the scenes, essentially.
Yeah.
So again, I did that for a while, and then headed up an innovation. Well, I headed up the research team in an innovation group, which had a big partnership with AstraZeneca. So their drugs were running out of copyright, and they needed some digital business models all of a sudden. So we did these huge kind of like innovation sprints, and long story short, like, they were very patient centric, but also scientific practitioner centric as well. So we did everything from redesigning the clinical trials experience, which hadn't been touched in 140 years, to designing kind of diabetes interventions for China, and almost like conference apps for medical practitioners, like to be able to, at the time it was quite innovative, being able to mark up slides on an iPad. If they're being presented on a screen, get them on your iPad, you can mark them up and then take them away for your team later on. So there were lots of kind of things like that. I then went freelance for about 6-7 years, doing a mixture of research, innovation, consulting, service design, and then when my daughter was born, I took my next perm role, my first leadership role really, as a head of service design at Barclays. So did that for a while, and then kind of went into service design and just general kind of like design leadership. So I had a brief stint at Frog UK, a big design agency, part of Capgemini, and then into HSBC, which is where I met you when you had long hair.
Yeah.
Well, we both had long hair, actually. Yeah, and at HSBC, kind of spent 3 years in the part of the customer experience design team there, partly building it up and making it kind of a really useful proposition for the business, and obviously finishing it, having kind of led the design academy side of things there as well. So that takes us all the way through that 15-year journey. It's hardly brief, but kind of you can kind of see the journey.
What's evident is like, so you've gone from studying design and you've followed that path all the way to where you are now, right? You've maybe been in some design companies, but those skills you've got are so transferable. Hence why you've worked in the finance and energy sectors, right? Because those companies have customers and they need people to come in and design services and products that are the right things for their customers. So it completely makes sense. And Dave, if we move on to like the skills that are needed for a role in design, what are the sort of things you need in terms of skills?
I think it's more on the softer skills. So if you're a good listener, if you can, by being a good listener, being an active listener, so really not just hearing what people are saying, but really listening deeply to what they're saying, why they're saying it, and what they really mean. I think that's a really key skill. The other one is asking good questions as well. Too often we see people asking very leading questions, I'd say. So often with like, you think that's a good idea, right? Instead of, what would you like to see here, for example? Or yeah, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to shut down conversations. You want to open them up. You want to elicit stories from people, because that's where the richness really is.
Yeah, that's where you get your golden nugget, right? When you really understand what the pain point is of an individual.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
makes
definitely.
sense. Makes sense. And
I
Dave,
think
go on,
sorry,
mate, go on.
I was just going to say, like, that's one of the key skills. I think the other ones are definitely like being able to tap into your creativity. So not everyone is an artist, right? But everyone can be creative.
Yes.
And designers typically over-index on the creative scale, for sure. But you've also got to have the discipline to continuously be creative as well. I think another key skill related to that is to be able to take criticism, or take negative feedback very well. I've seen lots of designers in the past like fall in love with their first idea, and then if it doesn't work out, they can really feel that, and it's up to you to kind of go, what do people like and what do people not like about it? Let's figure out a better way of doing it. And I think a final one that I'd add in there is the ability to collaborate. So whether you're setting up a project that you need other people's input into, or whether you're going and seeking feedback, or being asked to join a team, the ability to work with others in a really effective way, I think it's a good differentiator from a design perspective as well.
I think especially from the service design perspective, right? You've got so many stakeholders, and obviously you've got risk, you've got the business, you need to keep everyone happy, right? So having those conversations on a regular basis is really important when you work in design.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the best designers that I see are the ones that can also talk the language of the business. So I've over the years, I've found working in design teams, you tend to isolate yourself, or you tend to not get taken as seriously if all you're doing is going, oh, but this is better for customers. Oh, that's better for customers. If you can't then turn that into a meaningful business, kind of understand what other people in the business are actually what they find important, like being able to talk to a risk team to say, if we do it in this way, then actually your job's going to get a lot easier. Or approaching a risk team and saying, what income kind of brackets can we use for this type of mortgage application, for example, or what income types can we actually use, rather than going, we've designed a new process, can you just sign it off? It makes you look really naive, and I think so. I think if you can talk the language of the business, that makes it a lot more makes it a lot better.
And throughout your time, obviously over 10 years in service design, you've had a few stints in financial institutions and energy companies. What's been the biggest lesson that you've learned?
It's the importance of consistency, I think. So you and I are both fans of the High Performance podcast, and it kind of ties into the world-class basics kind of element here. And I would say, like, the difference between good and great is not doing above average. It's not kind of doing above average things or performing above average every now and again. It's doing average things, but with above average consistency. So
I like it.
So regardless of, I've learned this the hard way, right? So I've spent a lot of my career in, like, I've done fits and bursts of like really amazing stuff, but then, by my own admission, like, I would procrastinate, or I would drop the ball. I hadn't kind of delivered something on time or when I said I would do it, but I always thought, like, oh, I'm going to be all right because I can do these other really great things along the way. But over the last couple of years, really worked hard to figure out, like, like, how can I avoid that happening? And I think regardless of the industry that you're in, it's got to be about consistency. It's got to be about discipline. Most of the time, it's just about showing up and doing the best that you can every day. And I think that another key lesson that I've learned, both in personal and business perspective, is your life will become a lot more easier if you just assume that everyone is doing the best that they can all the time. So if you get irked or kind of annoyed by, whether it's someone's being slow in replying to you, or they've said something in a certain way that you didn't like, if you just assume that they're doing the best that they can with the resources and the skills that they have in that moment, then life will become so much easier. You'll stop second guessing people, or like, are they trying to annoy me? Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, they're doing the best that they can, so let's work with them to figure out how we can get over a particular problem along the
Be
way.
collaborative.
Yeah, and I think, like, being in a recruitment firm like Sandbrook, I think having that kind of people lens turned on all the time
absolutely.
will absolutely kind of make your life easier, for sure. But I suppose that on the thinking about kind of the businesses that I've been in, and the point of design, I suppose, is that, like, huge lessons that the businesses themselves have learned along the way is that when you ignore the customer, they just won't use it, right? There's a great quote. It's like, if you ignore the customer ignores you. So there was a great example of this, I think, in HSBC when we were working there, and the very start of what is now kind of the global wallet proposition, sending money internationally and stuff like that, very low cost, the technology team was like, it has to be an app. Like, we're worried about Revolut for business, we're worried about TransferWise, we have to build an app to compete. And all it took was kind of a couple of people to be convinced that we should spend, maybe 2 weeks out in Singapore speaking to actual customers who might end up using this type of product, that they said, I love the idea. I would love to be able to trade internationally at cheap rates. That sounds awesome. But for the love of God, do not build another app for me, because I've already got the one that you've signed me up to. I've already got this other one. I've got loads of other banks. So just don't build another app just to send money. So thankfully that changed the whole approach, like the whole strategy and the technology strategy behind that product. And you see it time and time again, in much more kind of prominent situations as well. So I think, like, who was it? Apple, with Apple, one of their senior executives who ran the Genius Bar, like, he actually came up with the Genius Bar concept, and he was poached by JCPenney, the American retailer. He went in there and said, guys, don't worry about it. I know what customers want. We're going to build our own kind of like Apple experience in JCPenney. They spent millions and millions kind of revamping the stores, taking away like vouchers and things like that had been there for a long time. Like, it was kind of a core part of the JCPenney shopping experience. Installed like cappuccino bars, making it a destination, and it flopped. Like, because customers, that type of customer, they loved the vouchers because they liked hunting for budgets or hunting for deals. They didn't want to hang up. They wanted to spend their time finding those deals. They didn't want to be hanging out in cappuccino bars in their shops. And he lost the money. He lost the company so much money. He ruined his own career, lost his job, all because he just didn't listen to customers. So there's all these cautionary tales out there, and I think, as long as you put the customers at the heart, or the end user at the heart of what you're doing, then you can't really go wrong.
Do you think, in your opinion, that these larger organisations within, let's focus on finance and energy, are getting better at focusing on customer? In my time at HSBC, I definitely saw that there was an improvement. There was definitely an improvement there.
I think it depends. Right? It depends where you are and what other things are going on in the business at the time. I think there are, like, businesses get a bit, impulsive, I would say, sometimes. Like, a few years ago, customer centricity was at the forefront of everything, and it still should be, for sure. But as soon as things like generative AI comes in, and, like, people saying, maybe you kind of get these like little brain worms in executives going, maybe I don't need as big a design team as I used to, because now I've got Firefly or ChatGPT or Midjourney to, maybe I could kind of create stuff using that. So I think they kind of get these impulsive quirks along the way. As a trend, though, I would say yes, they are getting more customer centric, because you see the emergence of things like chief design officers. And yeah, I know, like, teams will get affected by redundancies and cuts and reorgs all the time. And I think the challenge for any design team is to figure out where in the business it can be most effective. Because I've been in parts where, you know, it's part of the propositions team, for example, and that feels really good as a designer, because it's like, oh, we can actually shape what gets put out there into the world. But you also don't get anywhere close to touching the technology side of it and actually what it looks like. At the other end of it, you could be really close to technology and you kind of get told what to build, and that can be frustrating for design teams. There's also kind of like the structure of those teams within the business as well. So if it's the best way to do it would be to partner with product, I'd say. Like if you can get close to product and or engineering, that's a good place for design to be. But it's also how you partner with the business as well. So if you've got a centralized team, then that feels quite good, because it's like it's a center of excellence and everyone feels part of a family. But then you never get teams really embedded within the business. On the flip of it, if they're only embedded in the business, then they don't have a community of practice to come back to. So somewhere in the middle, what you'd call like a shared partnership model, where you've got a small center of excellence or a bench, essentially, like to kind of hold down the fort, while the main part of your design team kind of goes off and partners with project teams, is probably the best model that I've seen so far. But yeah, I think in financial services, I was actually speaking to a bank the other day, and they've done a really good job of embedding customer experience metrics into their scorecards, which makes a huge difference to how you would actually approach delivering a product or a service, because it's not just about the business outcomes, it's not just about the technology stuff. You've got satisfaction and meaningful customer metrics really baked in that from the start.
So is that NPS scores?
So NPS would be part of it, but there's also, you know,
Customer index.
Yeah, there's a whole range of measures that you could use. So it could be like, you know, system usability scores.
Okay.
It could be down to complaints, like reduction in complaints as a key measure. It really depends what you're trying to get out of it. Like NPS is okay. I think like if you've got something like we had at HSBC, where it's a really all-encompassing like net promoter system, that works, where you've got what you call leading and lagging indicators. But if you're just going on, would you recommend us to your friend or your dog or whatever, then that's much less meaningful.
Interesting. I mean, it's a whole new world, right?
Yeah.
To some people,
absolutely.
design is just not something you talk about much, but it's so important for so many businesses if they want to continue to be successful and deliver for their customers. Because ultimately, that's the most important thing, right? You're there to deliver a product or a service for a customer base.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, one of our previous bosses was saying like just the impact of talking to customers and understanding their challenges is a huge part of the design process. I think this particular person was saying that they used to work for a private wealth bank in Switzerland, and they've seen their kind of customer base or satisfaction certainly like falling off a cliff. One of the small things they did was just talk to people, and they observed that very wealthy people also have small dogs that they take everywhere with them. They're like their children, and understanding this meant that they took away their no dog policy in the branches and put in platinum dog bowls, and satisfaction scores and deposits really went up.
Yeah.
So it's just really simple things sometimes that can make a big difference.
Really interesting. Dave, we've got a bit of a closing tradition here. I want you to, if you could, name someone within your network who's really inspired you and explain why.
I will always say Nina Belk. So Belk. So Nina was my first, I'd say, proper manager when I entered the world of research. She was an entrepreneur before she joined the company that I was at, but her approach to people management and actually kind of helping teams really hone a craft was amazing. And that I modeled kind of my style of leadership on what she gave to me as well. So instead of a really tangible example is when we were writing research reports, she would always kind of like let me go, like once I was okay at it, she would say, okay, you do the first draft, and then I'm going to come sit down literally next to you and we're going to walk through it together. And then, but that she would then ask me, like, how can we tighten that up? How can we make that sharper? And so she wouldn't tell me the answer, which I still have a tendency to do. She would coach me into kind of finding those answers for myself. And she was also just a great laugh, to be honest.
Shout out to Nina then. Thanks, Nina.
Yeah, shout out to Nina. Yeah.
Well, look, thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you talking us through design and telling us about your experience and the roles that you've worked. So really appreciate your time. If anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
Best place would probably be LinkedIn. So it's just linkedin.com/David Stevens Design.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Dave, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thanks for having me.